Okay, so welcome to Maya. This is our first Maya training video, and this is the bit where you start to understand the Maya interface. So what you should really be doing is watching this video while you've got Maya open, and then following along with my clicks so that you don't get lost. This in a way is the most difficult bit of the course, is learning what Maya does and how to use it. When you first open up the software, you'll see we've got all of these buttons here. There's an awful lot on this screen. This is the default view of Maya out of the box, and there's a lot to know and understand. And so it's worth taking some time at this stage to try and understand what all of these different buttons do, because it can be a bit overwhelming at first, and it's important that you master them in order to get the hang of it. Okay, so with that in view, or with that in mind, let's start to look at some of the basic buttons on the screen. First of all, up here, I'm going to show you this little drop-down menu here. Now, at the moment, it's set to animation. If we were going to do some modeling, we would go into the polygons view, and that would change the drop-down menus here. If we were to do some rendering, let's say we wanted to render out our shot to make it all look pretty, we'd go to the rendering menu, and that would change these drop-down menus again. So it's important that you're in the right drop-down menu. We want to be in animation because that's what we're doing for now, but if we wanted to go into modeling or God forbid dynamics or end dynamic stuff, which we certainly won't be covering in this course because it's not necessary for animation, this is where you would begin. So you always want to make sure you're in the right drop-down menu. So we start in animation. Now the next thing we want to do is go and talk about what these buttons here do. This is the select tool. This button here, and actually, if I hold my mouse or my Wacom pen over the select tool for long enough, then it will show me it will tell me what these controls do. So always remember, if you're lost about what a window does, just remember you hold your mouse button over it, and it will tell you what it is that these buttons do. So that's your select tool there. The next crucial buttons here are the move tool, which is what you use to move something around, then the rotate tool here, and finally the scale tool. And I'll show you what they do when we create an object. So I'm going to create an object now, a simple what we call a polygon primitive, and I'm going to go to the create button here, and I'm going to go to create polygon primitives sphere. Except the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn off interactive creation. It's a slightly annoying feature. We don't need it for now, so I'm just going to turn that off. So now that takes the menu away, so I'm going to go back to the menu, create polygon primitives. You'll notice that interactive creation is turned off, and I'm now going to create a sphere. Ta-da! That's going to create a little sphere for me. So now I want to be able to go and look at that sphere, and in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down with my you can't see this because you can't see me, you can only see my screen, but I'm holding down with my thumb the Alt button, and that's at the bottom left of your screen, the Alt button, ALT, and then with my left mouse button I'm going to move it around. Okay, and you'll see that our view of the ball changes. Now this here is what we call the grid. We always create things on the grid. The grid really helps us. The grid helps us locate stuff in time and space, and it helps us get a sense of scale. One thing actually you'll notice that when you've opened up Maya out of the box, you'll find that you're not actually looking at exactly the same interface I am. You're probably looking at this interface here. To make that change, I went to Alt B, and that I held down with my thumb the Alt button, and then I held down B with my right finger. And I can actually, if I do that again, I'm doing it now, Alt B, I can change the background in Maya. This is actually probably the nicest background to work in. The only reason that is to say the grey shade one, it's the most attractive, the most easy on the eye, and that was a big change in Maya 2012. but I'm going to keep pressing Alt B until I get to the simple grey background, and the only reason I'm using this one is because it makes my videos a lot lighter, and that means that we have less data to download. Okay, so back to the basic keystrokes. So Alt left mouse button is going to make me do what's called dollying. I'm now dollying around the object. Now if I go to Alt middle mouse button, I'm going to zoom. Okay, this is Alt middle mouse. And if I go to Alt right mouse button, I'm going to move. So those are your three basic moves, and you need to practice those until you get them right. So that's Alt left mouse button is dolly, Alt middle mouse button is zoom, and Alt right mouse button is left. Is move. Now you want to practice those because those are your three basic commands, and you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to dolly, zoom, and move, and also to understand the difference. Dolly, you're moving around the object. Move, you're moving the object from side to side, and zoom, you're moving in closer or further away. If you can't do any one of those three things, you're not going to make any progress. Now, you can't see it on my screen, but I'm going to take my mouse button, or actually what I'm using, which is a Wacom tablet, and just before we go any further, I should explain why I use a Wacom tablet. You can buy them online. The Wacom company makes many tablets, and I highly recommend them. They are much superior to the mouse, and the reason they're superior to the mouse is because you're much less likely to get repetitive strain problems, often known as RSI, repetitive strain injury, or carpal tunnel syndrome, or the thing has various different names, and I'm no medical man, and I understand that these are different conditions, but whatever they are, I know for a fact that our industry is plagued by them. It is the dirty secret of the visual effects industry, is problems with repetitive strain injuries, mostly caused by the mouse. And if you get yourself a Wacom tablet, and I think they only cost about £100 now, you will find that you're much less likely to get carpal tunnel problems. So I highly recommend getting a Wacom tablet and a pen, which is what I'm using, and then using that. And here we go. I've just done a quick Google search. So here we are. This is what I'm using. This is a Wacom Intuos 3, I think. This is the exact same thing that I'm using here. But there are more modern versions. This one here is the Intuos 4. That's what most people use now. I'll just scroll up so that you can see that. And that's, I think, the most modern version. Anyway, I highly recommend that you get a Wacom tablet. So now I'm going to go down to the Start menu. That's the little, that's the icon on the bottom left of your screen. You can't see it in the recording because it's off the screen, but I'm going to go down that, press that, and what I'm going to do is go to, I'm going to type in the little box, Wacom Properties, or I'm just going to type in Wacom, and that will take me to the Wacom Tablet Properties tab, and that will allow me to customize my Wacom. So my pen is going to do a click, which is to say a left click, and then using this little button here, I can customize this to go to middle click and also right click, so that I can get those three things that I need: dolly, zoom, and move, all of which are incredibly important. And you can do that with the mouse as well. You can customize your mouse by going down to the Start menu on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go to another basic. Now that we can take our ball and we can move it around. Let's now go to another basic Maya function, and I'm going to hit the number 5 on my screen. Ta-da! And that is going to make my ball go grey. And this is what's called grey shade, right? And this is grey shade because the ball is now shaded grey. And if I press 4 on the screen, it's going to go back to wireframe. And again, wireframe is called wireframe because the ball now appears to have a wire frame, as opposed to when I press 5, in which it's now grey shaded. If I were to press 6 on my keyboard, You won't see any difference now because this ball doesn't have any color. We haven't applied a texture to it. But if it did have a texture, if it did have a color, then pressing 6 would make the color appear. So basically on your keyboard, 4 is wireframe, 5 is grayscale, and 6 is textured mode. And we usually work in grayscale number 5 in Maya. Okay, so now that we've got that done, and we can dolly, we can move, and we can zoom, and you've got your grayscale turned on. Now let's go ahead and move the ball. So now we come back to these little buttons on the left here. This one on the left here, that is your move tool. So if I click on that, you'll see a little three-sided arrow comes up. That's now to move things in the y-axis, which is if I grab this little green button, the ball will now move in the y-axis. And if I grab it in the x-axis, here that's the red one, it will now move in x. And if I grab it in the blue axis, that will move it in z. That's towards me. It's important to remember that Maya it's basically like you did maths at school. If you remember those charts you had to draw at school, up and down is Y, that's the yellow or green button. Side to side is X, that's the X-axis, and then Z is the third dimension, that's bringing it towards us. And we can see here this useful little view cube that Maya introduced in Maya 2012, where you can see the little ball moving towards us in Z, and then it moves right in X, and it moves upwards in Y. Okay, so that's your basic those are your basic controls. Now let's say we want to get the ball back down to the origin point, and I'm thinking, oh well, I've been moving this thing around a bit, and now I want to undo what I've done. So this brings us to another crucial and incredibly useful little tool, the undo button, and that is Z on your keyboard. And if I hit Z enough times, whoops, I've now undone the ball. So I'm now going to have to go to the edit button, and I'm going to go to redo, which is if I can actually find it. There we go. Redo create polygon sphere, and now redo move, and I've now taken my ball back up to the, well, I'll just move it up there so it's back to the origin. Okay, so now we've got our little ball, and now let's see what else we can do with it. And right below the move tool is the rotate tool, also super important, and that allows us to rotate the ball. So I can rotate it in the y-axis, which is this yellow one here, or I can rotate it in the x-axis, which is this one here, the red one, or I can rotate it in the z-axis. Now note that these axes will change colors when you select them. So to show that they've been highlighted, they will change color. So they'll basically go yellow to show that you have highlighted them. So if I click on the blue one, it goes yellow. That's the one that's highlighted. I'm just going to Z that out. If you grab the red one and you move it, that will also become highlighted. And I'm just going to Z all of those out so we get it back to the origin point. Now, one thing that you might want to do is when you're rotating things, it helps if you hold down the shift key. So let's say, for example, we select the Y rotation axis there. Now, if I hold down the shift key and then left mouse move this, I can't move it in any other axis. Again, if I select this one, hold down the shift key, I can only rotate it in that axis. Sometimes you only want to rotate things, in fact usually, in one axis. So holding down the shift key will help you control what you're doing. Okay, the next control here that we want to know about is the scale tool. Okay, so this little button here, that's the scale tool. And again, that allows us to scale things in Y, and also scale things in Z, and also scale things in, sorry, that was X over here, not Z. Scale things in X, and also scale things in in Z. Now you'll notice that as I'm making these changes in the viewport, which is what we call this window here, that it's changing the numbers up here. And the object that we created when we made this sphere was called pSphere1. Now, as a general rule in Maya, you want to make sure that you name things when you create them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click here on pSphere1, and I'm going to change this to ball. I'm going to call this ball because that's what it is. And now we know what it is, because pSphere1 just means Maya has created us a polygon sphere. Whereas what we need to know is it a ball? Is it our character? Because remember, when you're working on big complicated productions, that big models are made up of lots and lots of these different elements. So it's very important that you name everything so you can keep track. And we have now been changing the dimensions of this sphere by moving it around, and you'll see that as I change it, these numbers here, the scale numbers in X, Y, and Z, or Z if you're in the United States, start to change. And we can change those back. Let's say we want to return this to a perfect sphere. This window here, by the way, is called the channel box. This is what this is. It's the channel box, and it's because it's a box and it's got channels in it. And if we want to, say, take scale X back to 1, because this sphere we created was exactly 1 in every dimension, we just type 1 and then enter. And again, I can take the scale Z back to 1 by just typing 1 and then enter. Okay, and that takes the scale of our sphere back to a perfect sphere. We could also change the scale of it. We could make it 2, so that all those channels could become 2. And there we have it. And we can also take our rotations back to 0 as well. So we can take these rotations back to 0, and then we know that we're going to have a sphere which is back to the origin point in terms of its rotations. Now, that introduces you to these basic move controls, and also to the channel box. And the next thing you need to know about is the timeline, and that is this timeline down here. Now this is just like, if you have familiarity with any editing software like Premiere or Final Cut, you'll be familiar with the concept of a timeline. These are simply frame numbers. Here's frame 1 over here, here's frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on up to frame 24. Now those of you who are familiar with film will know that film runs through the gate at 24 frames a second. And Maya defaults to a 24 frame timeline. So this is basically exactly 1 second. So starting at frame 1, going through frame 24, that's exactly 1 second of animation. And we can also adjust these numbers here. Right now, our scene is set to 48 frames, which is 2 seconds, although we can only see 24 frames in the timeline. And if I grab this little button here and take it over here like this, now we can see the full 48 frames of our timeline. Let's say we just wanted to be animating something that was 24 frames long. We could set this number to 24 here in this little window here, and now we would set it back to 24 frames. So go ahead and fool around with that a little bit and make sure you understand what these do. This number here basically tells you how long your shot is. So right now we've got a shot that begins at frame 1 and ends at frame 48. So that's exactly 2 seconds. If I adjust this, then we can see all 48 frames of that in the timeline. Okay, so that's the end of the first video, the first Introduction to Maya Basics video. Go on to the second one and we'll go into more features of the Maya interface.